Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. We appreciate you making your way over here. I want to start by way of an illustration. 1872 in London, St. Bartholomew's Hospital, a young gentleman by the name of Alexander Muirhead, 24-year-old guy. His father made telegraphs for the military. And he took one of these telegraphs over to the hospital and he attached it to a feverish patient, and for the first time demonstrated an ECG, what we use today throughout medicine. So phenomenal, very, very impactful invention in medicine. In 54 years after that, a man by the name of Willem Einthoven received the Nobel Prize for the invention of the ECG. What happened in 54 years? What's the difference between what Mr. Muirhead did back in 1872 and what Mr. Einthoven did 54 years later? Any ideas? So what do you suppose doctors could do with an ECG in 1872? What do you suppose doctors knew about cardiac heart rhythms? What do you suppose they knew about diagnosing pathology, never mind understanding what normal looks like? They knew very little. 54 years later, Mr. Einthoven worked within a body of knowledge to identify not only what's abnormal or pathological, but also define what normal looks like. I think it's a great story that helps us to understand how, not only how data can be impactful in the right hands at the right time, in the right framework, but also fundamentally might tell us a little bit about what to expect in data science and as it grows. So you guys all know what this is, right? What's that? I think I gave it away already, right? It's an ECG. How many heartbeats? Here's a real hard question, and I got some nerds for the guy who gets it right. How many heartbeats are up there? 4. Who said that? Yeah, you know your stuff. Excellent. So it's 4 heartbeats, and why there's so many bumps and blips and stuff? Because it's called a 12-lead ECG. So it's 12 different angles on the same 4 heartbeats. Why there are 12 different angles? Well, you tell me, I'm not a doctor, but I do know that if you look at the bottom right down there, there's something very important. Josiah, do you know what's wrong with that right there? Can you tell me?
I can't.
Okay, just checking because you got the first one, did great in the first one. So when I was 19 years old, I was a paramedic and I worked on an ambulance. And I would look at this in about 5 seconds. I know that patient has a good chance of dying or at least having a heart attack in the next half an hour to an hour, if not quicker, usually quicker. Because what you see there is called an elevated ST complex. You know, this is what a good heartbeat looks like. The one to the right is what you call your elevated ST complex. It just basically means your ventricles aren't getting the oxygen they need. They're not refracting or resetting fast enough. They're getting tired, and they're not pumping blood. And if they stop pumping blood, they stop pumping blood to themselves, and it's a vicious circle, and people have heart attacks. So my ability at age 19 to read that in 5 seconds and say, we got to drive fast or get the paddles ready, like that's what data is in the right hands of the right person with the right training. At 19, I was not a smart person. I was not a very capable person, and I could do very little for a patient in a hospital setting, but I could diagnose some very, very simple things on an ECG. Again, the right data in the right hands with the right framework with the right training. A 19-year-old can take this and save someone's life, right? Where I think as a crowd of us, the rest of us kind of normal people, like, gosh, I don't know, it looks like a lot of bumps and blips and stuff. I have no idea what it is. But I think it's just, again, a great story about how data science and data in general can be very, very impactful. So let's take a little deeper dive here. Real question. Raise your hand if you're a data scientist. Great, about a third, quarter of you. That sounds great. Harder question. What does your mom say you do for a living? Can she tell her friends what you do for a living? More than just saying, he or she is a data scientist? The reason I ask the question is because I bet you 50 years ago, if you worked at NASA, maybe 70 years ago at NASA, your mom couldn't tell anybody what you did for a living. But now if I say NASA, oh yeah, we know NASA, yeah, we know what they do. If I worked at Facebook, my mom could say, oh, my son works at Facebook. My mom knows what that is. If I worked at Google, my mom kind of knows what Google is. She knows what a lot of technology is. My mom doesn't know what data science is. Maybe your mom does, mine doesn't. My point is that that's where we are in this industry, right? People outside of data science, don't really know what data science is. And I'm guessing this is a good measure, right? If your mom can describe very quickly what you do for a living, it's probably helpful that the rest of the world can say. Well, let's look at our collective consciousness, the greatest data science platform in the world, Google. What does it have to say about our collective consciousness about data science? So there's 32 links on the first 2 pages. I hit next once, and I went through and categorized what's there if I type in Google data science. Well, here's the numbers. 26 educational offerings on how to be a data scientist out of the first 32 links. What does that tell you about the maturity of data science? The first 26 of the first 32 links are how to be a data scientist. You can actually get a micro-master's in data science. What in the world is a micro-master's, and who cares? There's a data science wiki in there. There's a HBR article on the sexiest job of the 21st century. You guys are all the sexiest people. At least the quarter of you raised your hands are the sexiest people of the century. A Forbes article on the very short history of data science. There's a Reddit, obviously, data science, which you guys are all very familiar with, I'm sure. And there's one consulting firm listing their skills to help companies with data science. How bizarre is that? It's not even us. I mean, we're not listed as someone who can help with data science. How bizarre is it? The market out there's no people pitching their wares other than an education in data science. It's bizarre. But that's where we are. And also, here's the related searches. So you go, what do people search for in data science? They search for course, salary, qualifications, certification, degree, jobs, PDF. That's where data science is today. So let's take a couple of perspectives from some experts. If you cannot, as an executive, learn to speak data scientist, then you're going to lose. Gary Richardson, guess what he does for a living? He's a data scientist. I think data scientist is a sexed up term for a statistician. Statistics is a branch of science. Data scientist is slightly redundant in some way, and people shouldn't berate the term statistician. Nate Silver, what does he do for a living? He's a statistician, right? Torture the data and he'll confess to anything. You've heard that before, right? Ronald Kloss, he's an economist, right? And then we'll jump to this next. But I think the key thing here is that basically we are in the early days of data science, which is really exciting. There's a lot going on. Jobs that were called business analysts a year ago are now data science jobs. Degrees that were in business analytics or MBAs are now called data science MBAs. There's companies that did analytics are now data science companies, right? There's a lot of change happening, and people are taking advantage of this market growth and opportunity. But we're in a hype cycle. You guys familiar with the hype cycle? So where do you guys think we are in this hype cycle? I couldn't hear a thing. Yes, I agree with all of you. I think we're up here. I think we're on our way up still. I think this hype cycle is still going up. But why is there a peak there, and why does it go back down? And what part of this hype cycle should we be paying attention to? And why am I talking about this as it relates to finance and corporate impact? The reason I'm talking about it is because corporate impact defines the plateau. When you have the ability to either hit top line or bottom line for a corporate client who's willing to pay your rate of over $200 an hour because they see there's ROI there, it's because you're talking about things on the plateau of productivity. It's not because you're telling them how cool it is. Right? My customers mostly are CFOs or people who work for CFOs. I have a CEO of customers joining us today, which is great. We appreciate Mike being here. But generally, my customers are pretty cynical, and they want to know what they're getting for their money. And fundamentally, that market will be defined by this plateau of productivity, not by this peak of inflated expectations. So I guess my discussion, kind of my long preamble here to the discussion is, hey, how do we understand where data science is and where it's going, and how will value be articulated as it relates to data science? So let's talk about a term that I'm more familiar with. Let's call it finance value creation. So finance value creation is when your CFO comes to work every day and their whole team, and they say, hey, we're adding value to the company. How are they adding value to the company? Because they're not inventing new products. They're not selling new products. What are they doing? Well, they're making sure you don't invest in bad things that have a greater WACC than IRR, right? Internal rate of return, weighted average cost of capital. Make sure you're making good investments in people and projects. Making sure that you stop investing in bad things and making sure that you can use capital efficiently. More simply put, growing revenue, growing profit, growing margin, and reducing the capitalization requirements of the business and reducing the cost of capital. Simple, simple, simple stuff. Tell me, how does data science help these things? And how do we accelerate the conversation so the data science is selling to these concerns? I know that they're not interesting, they're not sexy, but this is how Wall Street's run, or this is how Fortune 5,000 companies are run based on this equation. With the exception of a great sales team and a rapidly growing market, everything else is going to be kind of tangled up in this web. So let's look at what CFOs are thinking about today. Economic conditions. What's happening with the economy? What's the Trump campaign or the Trump White House going to do for our economy? Regulatory change, cyber threats, disruptive innovation, privacy, identity management, talent management, global market volatility, organizational culture, resistance to change, customer loyalty. What's interesting is I track this stuff year over year. What's no longer a concern over the last couple of years and this year is forecast accuracy, cash flow, price pressure, and tax reform, although I think regulatory change and tax reform might be kind of close kissing cousins. But in general, our economy is a little bit stronger. We're not worried about forecast accuracy because the only time you really care about forecast accuracy is when it's going down and making sure you lay people off soon enough or you stop building products fast enough. When it's going up, you don't worry so much about forecast accuracy. Price pressure, obviously that's not a strong economy. So our economy is getting stronger, good news. But this is what CFOs are concerned with. So I look at this and say, okay, well, how do we make an impact on these things as data scientists? And I say that pejoratively because I'm not one of you guys. I'm not really a data scientist by trade. I did, however, 25 years ago, I had a great opportunity. I was handed a client by my boss who didn't want to deal with them because they were a pain in the neck. And the client was Gillette. Gillette was right here in the Prudential Center before they were bought by P&G. And I went over there to talk to them about a Hyperion upgrade, Hyperion S-Base upgrade. And that was my job, was to see them through this upgrade. And I started poking around, and I found a guy in the corner who basically used Hyperion to build this model. I'm like, tell me about your model. And we spent a lot of time together talking about his model. And he did a lot of work in Excel to model global sales for all of Gillette. What new blades and razors are selling, what did cannibalization look like between your Mach 3 and your Mach 3 Turbo, how are they positioned against Schick and their other competitors, and blah, 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 blah. And you guys know the market well enough, it's a cutthroat business. But did you know that at the time, I'll be here all day, thank you very much. Oh wow, that was too much applause. That went right straight to my head, I lost track of everything. What was that? Yeah, so we talked this through, and what I came to conclude is that he was doing this tremendously powerful model in Excel to figure out what global demand was going to be for blades and razors. And I said, there's a better way. I know S-Base, I love S-Base, it was a great tool back then. That was cutting edge, that was the data science of back then was OLAP, analytical processing, right? I loved S-Base. So I said, we can plug this into OLAP and we can actually do this much better. So we did, we built this cube, and we got stuck all of a sudden because if you know what a marketing curve looks like, right? There's this idea that, hey, I can spend $10 on marketing and get no return. I spend $1,000, I get a return. I spend $1 million, I get a bigger return. All of a sudden I spend $5 million, there's no more return. I've saturated my market, right? So there's a kind of a curve that reflects to your way. It's like this, right? It basically reflects, hey, you can spend too much on marketing. And there is a ceiling with marketing. So that's a function, right? That function wasn't available in any of the libraries we had at our fingertips. We went out and wrote a Java program that would calculate that function and give us the data back into our S-Base cube, right? That was bleeding edge stuff. We were super excited about it. Truth is, obviously, Procter & Gamble buys Gillette. They replaced this Hyperion thing with their Oracle thing that's better. A year later, they realized that the Hyperion thing we built was better at doing a global demand plan for their whole organization than Oracle was. Oracle buys Hyperion because they know they're better. But fundamentally, the little thing we designed was used by Procter & Gamble for a couple of years at least to forecast global demand. So very, very cool stuff. But again, I think it takes the same personality to drive this stuff home. There's an article, let me go back here for a second. The article I saw around being the kind of the sexiest people of the 21st century, all you guys, right? There's a young gentleman who got hired by LinkedIn, who was in the article, and he's kind of they make a big deal out of him. His name was Goldman, I think was the last name. No relation. But so he wanders around, he's a data scientist by training, or trade, or self-promotion, I guess. And he has trouble figuring out what to do. No one's listening to him. But you know what? He bumps into Reid Hoffman. And Reid Hoffman's like, ooh, data science, that sounds really cool. What do you want to do? He's like, I want free reign. I want to do my own thing. He goes, great. You have my stamp of approval. Go figure it out. And he made a big impact. So I think the important thing there is just like I found my kind of sponsor at Gillette to listen to me, that data scientist found someone who was a believer, right? Which again goes back to that curve, right? Do we have those advocates in that platform for productivity who are willing to invest in this? So if you look at our business, kind of pre-data science business, here's the kinds of things we're great at doing. And it's kind of small print. I didn't realize it's as small as it is, I apologize. It's analytics on financial results, it's root cause analysis, strategic planning, budgeting, driver-based rolling forecasts, pricing and profitability, customer analytics. Those are things we have been really great at. But fundamentally, data science makes it all better, right? So you want to look where data science actually impacts on bottom line. It's testing the significance of your root cause. Is it really a representative case? Validating causality altogether. Is this correlation or causality? Do people really understand their own data? Because I tell you, finance people, they know the numbers. They don't know what the root cause of the numbers are. So you guys can help finance people understand root cause in their numbers. They'll recite numbers rote back to you and tell you exactly what sales were 3 months ago. They know this stuff. It's scary how well they know it. They don't understand it. Right? And it's getting those models built so they really understand causality. What's happening in my market out there that's impacting my numbers in here? And that's where big data makes all the difference. Be able to kind of merge these huge data sets to do that. Strat planning, right? Strat planning is let's send all your executives to a golf course, they go, they drink some scotch, and make a plan for 5 years, come back and say, all right, build a budget to meet the plan. At the end of the day, those strat plans are built mostly by instinct. It's Malcolm Gladwell kind of stuff, right? Those guys know their business well, and they are experts, and they're probably worth what they get paid, as much as it pains a lot of us. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily always found in science, which means they can actually get behind the market a little bit if they're not careful. Right? What you guys can do for them is you can take their models and build maybe simple Monte Carlos, but go much, much further to make sure they understand the strat plans and what the top and bottom really looks like. When does success fail on the upside, growing too fast, and when does success turn to failure on the bottom side? And also risk modeling, right? You go back to that list of things that CFOs are concerned about. Let's do that for a second. These are all risks. There's no upside here at all. It's all risk. Every one of these is a risk of something happening. They're scared to death. All of it's risk management. So at the end of the day, the more you can tell them how scary the bear is outside, how big the bear is, how many teeth it has, how big its claws are, and how far away it is, the more value you drive in a finance environment. By the way, you know the trick of dancing with a bear? You can decide when it starts. You just can't decide when it ends or how it ends, right? That's the trick of dancing with a bear. Budgeting and driver-based forecasting, right? Are your drivers significant? We all know what driver-based planning is. I'm actually a huge fan of driver-based rolling forecasts. They sound complicated. They're dramatically more simple than you think. But fundamentally, the one choice people make poorly is what their drivers are, because finance people don't understand the drivers of their business, because they're not willing to walk down to the supply chain or walk out to the salespeople or walk wherever they need to go to make sure they have the right inputs on the drivers. You guys can help them do that. You guys can help them make sure that those drivers are significant and meaningful. And of course, quantifying them, right? People want to say, hey, it's one thing. If you ask a sales guy, what's the number one driver of business success? It's sales. If you want to talk to a product guy, it's product costs. It's lean manufacturing. Those things all count. But how do you make sure they count the right amount? How do you weight the drivers appropriately for both top line and bottom line? That's something that our current skill set in finance doesn't have in great detail. And the biggest reason they don't have a great skill set there is because they're too busy doing the numbers. They're too busy loading data, validating data, creating PowerPoints, and starting over again. They're smart people. There's a lot of great MBAs and statisticians working in finance. They have no time to develop and hone their craft. They're too busy chasing numbers to get the monthly close, the quarterly close, or the forecast, or the budget reforecast, or the forecast rebudget done every month. Pricing and profitability, I think it's pretty obvious, right? What happens if you change your price? You make more money, you lose some customers. There's a tipping point there, right? I drop my price, I get more customers, I lose margin. I raise my price, I get more margin, I lose customers, right? It's like, where's the tipping point? You guys can help predict that tipping point a lot better than finance folks can traditionally. Secondarily, modeling cannibalization. Cannibalization in the case of Gillette's a great thing. Gillette owns 90% of their own market, or at least back then they did. Gillette had 90% of the razors in the market. So they weren't competing with other razors, they're competing with themselves. Why do you think they went from like a Mach 3 to a Mach 3 Turbo to a Mach 3 Turbo, whatever it was? I mean, the names are ridiculous because they're constantly trying to get you to buy the next razor, which frankly, I only got a new one every Christmas in my stocking. Never actually bought one for myself. And the last thing I'll talk about briefly, which is where we're going to kind of go next, is this idea of what, customer analytics. Customer analytics, I think, is a hidden gem. Why? Because that actually is a huge driver of revenue. And if you guys can impact revenue, you can command the hourly rate you want to command, right? Helping to manage SG&A cost, helping to manage travel expenses, that's a $50 an hour kind of task. If you can tell people where the money is or the revenue is, you can make a lot of money and the rates can be high and you can develop a great reputation as a data scientist to do that. But it's not simple stuff. A few things that have changed our business from a data science perspective that we really couldn't do very well, that we're doing better now and growing. Demand planning, macro factor forecasting, there's a mouthful. Fraud detection, predictive consensus modeling, predictive census modeling, real-time customer churn prediction. These are things where data science is changing our business from who we were, really kind of being relegated to finance, to now being able to impact our clients' growth a lot more aggressively. So with that, I want to introduce Mike. Mike's the CEO of ButcherBox, and he's got to share some ideas with you. We've been working with Mike for a while, and I asked him to join us, and good news is he said yes. It's up to you.
Hello. Yeah. I am the CEO of ButcherBox. I'm probably the dumbest guy in the room, so that feels good. ButcherBox, we are grass-fed beef delivered in the mail. That's a picture of one of our happy cows. That's actually out in Western Massachusetts. I started the business about 18 months ago. We started with a Kickstarter campaign that went really well, and then the business has just grown and grown and grown since then. Pretty early on or I would say pretty late, about 14 months into the business, I started looking around and saying, wow, we try so hard to acquire customers, but we literally do nothing to figure out how to keep them. Maybe we should look into that. So that was how we found Archetype and how we started chatting with them. So just some quick metrics. What we do is we sell subscriptions. You can do every month, every 2 months, or every 3 months, and you can do beef, and then we added chicken and pork into the mix as well. So the idea is that we ship you the meat that you need for the month. It's butcherbox.com in case anyone wants to go in there and buy. Established in September 2015, we have, this is actually out of date, we have about 20,000 subscribers right now. We're growing quite rapidly. We have not raised money. We don't want to. We want to grow a profitable, enduring company. Our mission is we want to make 100% grass-fed beef accessible to all. We have 2 types of customers. Some are in the middle of the city, and some are in the middle of nowhere. So the city customer is likely looking at us as a convenience thing, and the middle of nowhere customer is literally, they can't find this product elsewhere. And what's most important to us is a consistent experience for our customers. Obviously, quality of the product, claims, meaning where it comes from, how well it's treated, welfare, animal welfare is really important, stewardship of the environment, and helping people select awesome quality meat. But none of that's really important. This is the thing that's the most important. This is like, I like to tell people, I like to think of things at like a 5th grade level. So CAC, customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, LTV. A subscription business is all about, is your lifetime value higher than the cost to acquire a customer? Like, that's it. That's how far it goes. Obviously, there's a ton of data that goes into both of those numbers. So understanding, what's happening with Facebook, what's happening with Google, attribution, how one thing leads to another, and what the best path is, and all these questions about customer acquisition cost, hugely important for somebody who's running a company like ours. Lifetime value becomes the biggest driver. So lifetime value is the amount of revenue that we can get off of a customer through their lifetime with us. So that's looking at churn, that's looking at average revenue per box, and then in our case, it's also looking at margin. How much money do we make off them? Can we get them to add stuff to their box? Does that hurt how many months they're on? And with meat, it's even more interesting because you could say, let's add more value to their box. Let's put more weight in there. But we have a lot of customers who cancel because they have cuts that are left over, and they're like, oh, it's too much. I need to ratchet down. So we walk a very fine line of providing you a great value, but not so much meat that you want to leave. We came to Archetype with the question of, and started looking at our data and trying to figure out, how do we keep subscribers? And is there a way that we can juice our lifetime value if we knew that a subscriber was going to leave before they knew they were going to leave? Which is a pretty profound way of looking at things. But essentially, can we guess at the types of people who are going to leave and do something about it before they leave? And then on the acquisition side, we know which customers are the highest lifetime value customers. Can we find more of them? And what do they look like? And how do they, like, what things do they like to do? And how do we kind of find great customers and then keep great customers? So that's basically what we did. This is not me, but I can talk about it. You want to talk about it? Okay, cool. So anyway, what I will say, I'll just say the stuff on the left are the platforms that we were using. So when I built the company, I wanted to do, one of the amazing things about starting a company today is you can cobble together a system that's essentially free across a whole bunch of different things. So Stripe is amazing. They give you a ton of data back, Google Docs, analytics, all that stuff is free. But if you want to take it to the next level, you really need, I believe you need the help of data science. So we have been a very happy customer, but I'll let Gordon talk about what they actually did, which was pretty interesting.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, probably, right? Another 20 minutes, great. So we have 20 minutes. So I think just, it's hard to figure out where to draw the line in terms of the kind of how deep we go in the conversation. We have another 5 or 6 slides that are on the technical side. So I'm going to invite the guys who actually do all the work. I mean, Mike and I get the glory, but Israel and Gordon do all the work. So they're going to come up and kind of talk to the approach, and we'll try to just get to questions in about 10, 15 minutes. And of course, we're available after if you have further questions. Oh, good. So, Gordon, you up?
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Mike. And Israel, I'm sure there'll be a couple questions that you'll need to help me field here. So this is, my background's very much in solution architecture for Archetype. When I think about solving problems for customers, it's very much around, what are the key components that we work with? What tools can I use to solve that problem? What are the data sources? What are the data inputs, outputs, et cetera? So I love diagrams like this because there's a lot of cool logos and it shows kind of conceptually what we do from a systems perspective. So as Mike mentioned, they use Stripe as a billing system, and there's Google Analytics obviously to capture some of the web traffic. All of that data is we're able to cobble together and basically into 4 different steps as part of the project. Prepare, enrich, model, and present to Mike and team. The data preparation is really 60 to 80% of the work for these types of engagements, for these types of projects. Stuff like cleaning up your zip code list, right, so that it's 5 digits and not 4, right? Very basic stuff like that I'm sure you guys deal with on a daily basis. Still needs to be taken care of. One thing that we're also doing for Mike is doing some data enrichment. So he talked earlier about how do we acquire customers and make sure that they're the right customers to provide that that high lifetime value. We know that by enriching our data, so reaching out to places like Tower Data and Experian to get income information, population density, things like that might be indicative for different segments of the customers. Once we have all that data together, have it all prepared in one place, we're able to model it, run it through both descriptive and also statistical models to figure out how does the data look and what are the significant factors toward either a customer leaving or keeping a customer. And then obviously presenting the findings. So from a tools perspective on the project, we use Tableau for a lot of the charts and graphs, and I'll show you 1 or 2 here in a minute. We also used R and SPSS for the data side. So here's an example of one of the charts. And I'm going to show you a couple charts, and I apologize, I don't think they mean anything, which is why we're showing them to you, because I didn't want to get up here and give you some sort of secret. So this was a chart, I think Mike did see this chart, but I don't know that it tells us anything. But here's some Tableau viz that we did to try to look at 1 or 2 factors. In this case, we're looking at upgrades to see if there was something valuable in the data with how people would upgrade and when they would upgrade relative to when they signed up for the email or whatnot. There's some blue dots at the top, but otherwise I'm not seeing anything. We also looked at things like cancel dates, and this is another thing that we put it together, but ended up not meaning anything based on statistical analysis, and then also just kind of a cursory look at a chart. Again, we were looking at subscription dates and cancel dates. Is there some sort of trend there? The real magic came in when we did this statistical modeling in R and SPSS, and I gave you a decision tree here, obviously with data blacked out, so you can't see all the pieces. Basically trying to filter out at a statistical level, what is the most important factors that indicate if a customer is going to stay with Mike or going to leave. And we did a number of different things. Decision trees is what we pictured here because it seemed to make the most sense from a presentation perspective, but we also did Poisson, Logit, and obviously basic statistics, averages, medians, just basic things like that. And I think that's as far as I want to cover, at least from this perspective. I did most of the data prep and modeling, so if you have questions there, I'm happy to take them. If you want to talk about some of the statistics, data science stuff, Israel is happy to answer questions. But I think at this point, that's all we have in the presentation, and I'd love if you guys have any questions for either us as an archetype team or for Mike. Thank you.
Do you guys have questions for anyone? Sir.
Yeah, I can share a few things. So one of the things that they came up with was if somebody, so we have different box types. So there's all beef or beef and chicken or beef and pork and beef, chicken, or pork. We've known for a long time that the all beef box was the most expensive for us to service, just because beef is expensive and chicken is less expensive. But we didn't know that if somebody orders all beef and doesn't move from all beef into a different plan, they're way more likely to churn. So that immediately was like, okay, after they've received their first box, we're going to either get them to do double all beef, which is like a lot more beef, move to every 2 months or every 3 months, or move their plan. And now we have a really good way of saying, okay, we're going to implement those 3 things. We're going to watch that data and make sure that it changes. That was one. The other big one, which is not done yet, but we're working on the data enrichment side, is around who our customer is and the types of things that they like, because it will enable us to go after, for example, one of the things was home furnishings, like luxury home furnishings seems to have some correlation with our customer. Well, okay, great. So now I can go out to Restoration Hardware and try to do a deal with them, or I can go out, we can specifically target potential business development deals based on, they probably would never even think about doing a beef company, but if I can get a discount in their mailers, that could be huge for us. So yeah, there have been things like that have been really really big for the company.
Other questions? Sir.
How long did this engagement take from start to finish, and where were the bottlenecks in that time?
So back to the 60 to 80% of data prep. I mean, that took a couple weeks just to sit down and understand, all the different data sources that you had. Some of it was, pretty straightforward. Others, was over Excel or email. And we probably spent 3 to 4 weeks just preparing the data and gathering everything in one place. And then once we actually sat down with R and SPSS and Tableau, it was pretty quick. Like I had charts the same day. As soon as we had everything all connected and put together, we had charts, and then Israel started doing decision trees right away. And I think as far as the insight around some of the box types, I think we found that within 3 or 4 days, I think, and once we actually started that phase of the project. So end to end, 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, having worked for kind of the big companies as well as the smaller but rapidly growing companies, this is feels very agile. It wasn't agile by design, but it is. I mean, our decision-making process is very tight and very small, and we're making a lot of headway in 8 weeks. And it's kind of cool because it's a whole different decision-making process when I can text Mike and he texts me back. All right, these guys are texting him back and forth. It's much higher engagement. Decisions are iterated 2 or 3 a day. It's not one every 3 months. We don't have to get a board meeting together to make a decision. So it's a fun place to work when you're kind of have other customers that are billion-dollar companies that take forever to make decisions. But that's probably a big part of getting this done in 8 weeks is that the whole decision-making process is very tight. Other questions?
I know you've been in business for 15 months, so through the data work that you've done, has it revealed your break-even point, and has it revealed your perfect customer?
By break-even point, you mean the point at which we...
The CAC and
Yeah, that is an ongoing target. CLTV changes all the time because we're buying different products all the time. So that has been a lot tougher to figure out. And it has also highlighted some grave issues that we have with the way that we track financials. So we are in the process of putting in an ERP, which is awful. Yeah, it's no fun and expensive. So we have a pretty good sense, but what we do is just be super conservative. We're like, okay, it could be this or this. Let's take the low one and solve for that, knowing that we'll make it up, and we'd prefer to aim lower and over deliver.
has it revealed who your perfect customer is yet through the data work?
Somewhat. I don't think that we have our perfect customer person yet. One of the reasons why that is one of the ways that we've grown pretty dramatically is we have a lot of people who follow the paleo diet, which is eat like a caveman, so meat and vegetables. And we have a lot of people on that diet because we went after these influencers in that space. So we went out to nutritionists and said, hey, could you send an email to your audience saying you should try this product? So if you look at the data, it would probably say, oh, geez, paleo people are pretty important. But it's highly skewed because that was the first market we went after. One of the challenges that we have also is we're adding so many people onto the base. It's hard to actually know what's going on because you have those first customers, and we're really like unlocking things. So you have those first customers who have been there for a really long time, and then you have lots of others. But the most exciting thing for us is if you look at box subscription companies, so there's obviously a lot of them. There's the Blue Aprons and HelloFreshes and Birch boxes and dog boxes. There's a whole bunch of them. There's like a box for everything. Most of those, in my estimation, are they're really luxury items. So Blue Apron, like you could decide to cut the vegetables yourself instead of having them cut for you. And what I think happens is for a lot of those box companies, somebody tries it and they're like, meh, yeah, I don't like it. Whereas ours is something different. Like we're providing a product that most people cannot receive at their house. Like they go to the grocery store and it's not there. The variety of cuts that we send to people, because we're centralized distribution, is way richer than you could get even at like Cambridge, Massachusetts Whole Foods. Like we literally sell a much wider variety of product. So if you believe that you should be eating grass-fed beef and you don't just want to eat ground beef, you don't really have any options, and that's where we fit in. Yeah.
Has this whole process changed the way you store and manage your data? Or like kind of just figure out data collection methods?
That's a good question. And I know there was some work on our SQL. I don't know.
Like there's like a Salesforce or something where you have a centralized place. Because you mentioned you had email, like data over email. I mean, have you guys had any steps towards, has this helped you kind of like put your data in one place or realize the need to do so?
It has put more fear in me, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing I would say is, as we discover certain customer segments, we are pushing that data to other tools that allows Mike to customize the experience for those people. And that's one area. It's actually decentralizing the data in some ways. But for the most part, the customer data that we analyzed was coming from one spot. The example I gave over email was just something around some of the older customers who their transactions were tracked offline. So it's not like we were literally pulling everything and like scraping emails together.
Good question over here.
You talked a bit about just how time-intensive the data preparation is. So what recommendations would you have for minimize the amount of preparation going into that funnel?
I mean, I think data preparation is two things, right? It's a quality of the data you have coming, that's being created, and sometimes you control it, sometimes you don't, right? You can't always control the quality of the data, but the great thing is, are you actually improving the quality of data along the way? And so it's oftentimes we kick the can and we kind of band-aid things. We never go back and fix data quality, which is oftentimes an ERP problem or a transactional system problem. And we, in the analytical layer, we just band-aid it, and we fat finger some numbers in there. We create artificial joins. Whatever we do to get the numbers to look right, we back end it. And so obviously going back to deal with data quality is a big thing. I think what's more important though is oftentimes when we start these exercises, and I think you guys are as guilty as anybody, is that we go after the data first, not the master data first. If you guys go after master data first and actually you can actually define the attributes of the question you're trying to ask and answer before you actually start pulling the data in, you're going to cut a ton of time out of that process. Just think about the SQL statements. Think about your where clauses. If you know your where clauses first before you start pulling data, you're going to have a lot less iterations, right? It's understanding your master data. What's the problem? How do I gate or fence the problem well? How do I not fence it too narrowly? Because there's going to be second and third degree questions off of the first question. And having some good old-fashioned hard debate in front of a whiteboard for probably twice as long as you feel like you want to before you just start dragging data sets into Excel or SAS or whatever the tool is. Because I think all of us, data geeks, we're like, we don't really know the question yet, but let's just start looking at data. We'll find something, right? It's kind of our inclination. But I think master data is probably the holy grail of doing our work well.
My background's originally engineering. And so in engineering, you start with the design, and it starts on paper. Before you build a widget or anything else, it's all in the computer, right? You got a 3D model, and you can rotate it in the computer, and you test fit things, and it totally works. I think one thing that Israel and I went back and forth on a lot is, he knows the statistical modeling really well, and I knew sort of just your basic descriptive and SQL and database technology. And he would come up with an idea, we should go look at this, like the number of blah, 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 right? And I was like, I got to add that column in. And so I'd go do some math and like add in that data column for him. And then he'd go analyze and be like, no, I really need the nulls removed. And like, all right, no nulls, got it. I'll make them -1s. How about that? And so I'd go make it -1s. And then you go, well, I actually want the back and forth, right? Design. Figure out what you need, what you want to analyze. Obviously, it's going to have to be iterative, but that probably would have, if I could go back and change one thing, I'd probably shortcut that or design it.
I think what Gordon's saying is if we did it his way, it'd be better. Any other questions? We got like 1 more minute left. Any other questions?
This is an interesting example of using data and analysis and analytics at a pretty early stage of your company. If you got to wind the clock back, knowing what you know now, how would you have approached some of those issues when you launched or were designing the business?
So this is actually the second company I've run, and the last company we got pretty deep into data near the end, and so it was something that we actually, when we started, we were doing customer surveys. We were like very data driven from the beginning, and I think one of the reasons why we've been able to grow is because we're always open to what kind of stuff the signals are sending. So, for example, we didn't really know to go after the paleo market until we saw some guy wrote a tweet about our Kickstarter campaign and a bunch of orders came through it, and we're like, let's go talk to that guy. And then, that's turned into like a whole strategy with 6 people working on it. So yeah, I mean, there's been a huge openness. I guess I think we, for the first year I said, let's just worry about getting more beans and let the bean counters figure it out later. Probably should have been a little less cavalier about that. I've just, my perspective has been, we don't have a business here if we can't get this thing off the ground and start selling a lot of subscriptions. I think that's gotten us, that level of kind of focus has gotten us to where we are, but now we're doing a whole bunch of like ripping things out and being like, oh geez, this number is actually completely wrong. And it's a pretty humbling time right now to be ripping this stuff apart now. But I'm also happy, we're very young in terms of already looking into this stuff and buttoning this stuff up before we really start scaling. So I guess that's the silver lining in it.